Let's rock and roll. Let's get settled a little bit. Take a few deep breaths. Emily said she was totally wondering what was in the diffuser. So.
Oh, perfect. Sarah, what did she say?
Oh, hello.
You never diffuse aroma ease.
So she's intrigued.
Oh, okay.
Trendsetter over here.
I know. Look at me go.
I know, it's very exciting.
I also want to say hi to Kai. He's
Hi,
our
Kai.
5-year-old audience member.
It's very exciting. All right, let's take a few deep breaths. I call in my oversoul. And some more deep breaths. I used to be disconnected from the collective. Good. And I call in my true soul essence. Before we go right into light language, let's also call in the field of this transmission and the energetics that are here for us as a group and individually. Some deep breaths. And whenever you're ready, Miriam.
Okie doke. I feel like that's one. Oh, koresikitain nesitei prisisitai tikara. Ai, lasitadai. Horisikistain no pariasikistain negaravasin tanto na boyarsikishti. E garavasan tanto mai sikisti. Na vosi na titarasikistain to karievasin tanto. Oh, koresistein to kariambo. Na garevasin tanto na poripapasista kariatata toi porisikistain no kariata. Niin porisikistain no kriasititia tu porisikistain no paria porisikistain karesititi roi porisikistain no pidä tikrisintentaan no porisikistain no e karavasen tanto moi karavasin tanto kieta essete diantanti karesin tanto moi sete keste karo kai senna puute siitä te kastito Porita tanta kas nai te po te sikra tantan ni karivisin dashte no pori para e karavasan tanto mai karia pori ho karavasin tanto karia porita takastino e karavasan tanto mai karesikiste e karava no porisikiste no kiriata e karavasan tanto moi karasin dashtita no Karesin tanto mai karastikastain no karusikastain tinta kara. Karavasan tanto naeta moisikastin nai purita kasha Porita te cresi tanto, nai cresi stein no crea. Caresi che stinita, droi parisi te tanto. Carasi tanto. Sin tanta. Istanai cositei parisi te tanto. Si che stein no baia. Si tatra. Tresitin da che stino rai.
All right. It is a pleasure as always to be here. Welcome, welcome. We're going to continue to give just some time and space for some energy to land, for you to get settled in, get comfortable. We have a lot of context coming. Not necessarily a bunch of information, but big context coming. We're excited to be able to share. We're also excited for David to be able to begin to put out some things as him, by him. And we want to speak a little bit into this doc that he put out. But really more broadly, we want to speak to corruption, darkness, the scary things about Earth, that many, many, many people are learning about right now in this very moment, and where this is ultimately going and your place in it. So for those of you who have been around this work for a while, you likely have heard us speak about the levels of clearance or stages of enlightenment, or just the stages and phases of learning who you are in the world, building sovereignty, understanding your place in the world, stages of awakening. And what you'll notice is that after you come out of what you could call sleeping, out of these core three paradigms of either acting for survival to get your basic needs met, or acting to get what you want, whether it be to feel better or to have more. After a short period, that fourth stage of recognizing that there must be more to life than this, an education period opens. Now, the way that we laid out this education period is as global education first, then impact-driven, then an etheric education. So individuals learn about the world, and as they learn more about the world, they wish to engage with that and find their place within what they're learning and how to help. But then at some point during that process, they realize that they may begin to lose themselves, and they want to come back to who they truly are. And they begin to go on this spiritual journey for a wide variety of reasons. There are a wide variety of rationalizations that take them to this next phase of etheric education. And then further, beyond this, are the stages or phases of really the work that we've been doing here for quite some time. Building your own unique feed and channel, your own connection to your own intuition, to your oversoul, to these units of consciousness. Learning to trust that through your experience, and then beginning to land your soul essence fully into your body, becoming that and radiating it out into the world. So this is the trajectory that we've given or provided, not just for those of you on a spiritual journey, but really just across the board. This is what Earth is doing right now. And at the beginning, we started a fairly unconscious collective rooted within, unconsciously, the first paradigm. They're taking for themselves, fending for themselves, having to fight for their survival. And really, one of the main differentiators here in the first paradigm is that they have to plan. They have to plan and execute on that plan. And that plan is theirs. It's all done on the ground floor. Now, what the world is waking up to over time and will continue to wake up to, and what you've already woken up to a significant degree, is that you on the ground floor don't really need to plan. It's important to have an idea of what's happening. It's important to be here, of course. It's not a whimsical plastic bag floating through the wind. But there's a recognition that the larger orchestration of divinity is incredibly precise and is delivering you the ideal in every moment. And that that's ever changing based on what's happening in the world and what's happening in your own life and the decisions that you make and that those around you are making. And that you don't need to figure that out because it's already been done for you and is done for you constantly. That you are taken care of, you are held, and that as long as you continue to trust yourself, you will come into alignment with the ideal for your life. It is the greatest possible existence you can live here personally, and is also the greatest possible impact you can have on the planet. That win-win is ideal, and it's being delivered to you constantly. So what you've been doing is learning how to sort out that ideal from those remnants of biological programming that say, yeah, that doesn't entirely sound ideal. There's something that sounds off about that, or perhaps I'm not going to be safe. Perhaps things aren't going to work out. I'm afraid to do that, or I'm deeply confronted or triggered about that ideal, so I'm going to do something else. Building awareness around those pieces of you that say, hey, let's do something else, and further settling back into the ideal, into your own truth, trusting yourself. So keep going, keep trusting, welcome home, right? Landing all the way back down into who you truly are. So this is the context that we've spoke about previously that we're going to build into today just a little bit. And we're not going further out into what's next for you, because in a way we've already established that. It's your essential radiance. It's landing your essence into your body and radiating out in the world. But where we're going instead is seeing where that radiance is going into and what's happening in the world right now. So there have been some who have noticed, as we've been teaching this material throughout some time, that their journey didn't look like that. Their journey didn't look like, I learned a lot about the world, wanted to make a difference, and then woke up to spirituality. That their journey often was, there has to be more to life than this, straight into some form of spirituality or the beginning of a spiritual understanding of the world. So today, because of where the world is, it's incredibly relevant to be able to tell you where you fit in and what this entire process of awakening for you has been and why it hasn't entirely mapped perfectly over these levels of clearance as helpful as they have been for many. For the past 10 years or so, there's been a massive surge of awakening into that etheric education, a massive surge of awakening into soul. Now, for many, this happened far before they learned about the mechanics of the world, how politics work, how the government works, how money works, how corruption works. Before any of that, and before any recognition of people who were trying to do good and people who were trying to maliciously take. Before any real understanding of what's here, for about the last 10 years or so, there's been a percentage of the population that we've called the cutting edge, who has been going deeply into etheric education, understanding their own soul, understanding their own truth. Now, the large majority of the planet has not been doing this. The large majority of the planet for the past 10 years has been slowly moving really from that survival-based obligatory action, I have to do A, B, C, D in order to survive, to, oh, okay, there's something here where if I do certain things, I can get more of what I want. They're moving from that first phase into either 2 or 3 to feel better or to get more. And some have moved toward those realizations of there has to be more to life than this, and started a exploration into themselves. But what's happening right now is incredibly unique. What's happening right now on the planet is that a massive percentage of the population is transitioning out of those core 3, which is really unconsciousness. It is autopilot, and it is incredibly manipulatable from the outside. If they believe that they can get somewhere to feel better or to have more for themselves by doing something, they'll do it. And even some of the morality, even when it feels a little bit off, even when their own intuition is pulling them sideways or away from that thing, they're still very likely to do that. So this core 3 is incredibly manipulatable. But the world is beginning to move out of this core 3 through that phase of self-acceptance, through that phase of there must be more to life than this, and into a global education. So you may have noticed over the past year or so, there's been a deep desire to learn more about the world for many spiritual people. And this has taken them down a wide variety of rabbit holes. This has taken them down a whole new chapter of having to sort through an entirely new set of facts, an entirely new sense of what the world even is. Essentially, what's happened is this. That progression through that global education into impact-driven and into etheric education is the standard path through. But what most of you did is you went to stage 4, said there has to be more to life than this, and leapfrogged into stage 7. And now, as the world is moving into stage 5, you are going through stage 5, that global education, with the rest of the world. So if you think of this as a classroom, the class is studying chapter 4 and begins to move into chapter 5, but you've been studying chapter 7 and no one quite understands what you're saying. Some people avoid it. They don't quite know how to be with it. But as the classroom moves from chapter 4 into chapter 5, you were going back to chapter 5. And you were studying it with them. This isn't true for everyone here, and there will be people who will not feel as much resonance with the second paradigm in the months to come, and that's okay. But there's a large majority of individuals who have been deeply entrenched in spirituality, who have been deeply dialed into who and what they are and their own intuition, seemingly floating in a pocket of reality that the large majority of the class doesn't understand. And where this comes into play now, as you are circling back with the rest of the class, is that once the classroom moves into more of an impact-driven phase, which you're also seeing now, there are some of those patriot movements, there are some conspiracy theorists, there are individuals who are driving forward into action. What do we do about this? And this movement we call impact-driven. It's the result of an education. When you learn that there's corruption, when you learn how things work, you want to find your place within it and do something to make it better. Inevitably, these individuals are going to begin moving into an etheric education. They're going to learn that there's more to this reality than just what's physical. And when they do, they get to the toughest piece of this entire journey for someone on earth right now. The etheric education has the least amount of guidance, the least amount of consensus knowledge, It is incredibly taboo. Most people don't know how to relate to it, and most of the ways to relate to it are incredibly archaic and outdated and lead into disassociation or into dogma. So etheric education being incredibly, incredibly difficult, if you look at this from a godly perspective, or you look at this from the 50,000-foot view, what you see is a pocket of the population that decided to take on that task first so they can help the rest of the population later to smooth out that journey. And if you look at the whole moves through that progression much faster than it would have otherwise. So essentially, what you've decided to do with your own free will, every step of the way, is to lean into a future chapter of Earth first that's incredibly difficult, that people are going to struggle with. But now once the class gets there and has a million teachers or a million questions for the teacher, you're able to support. You're able to be there and help your fellow classmates to sort through this. This is why, for years, we've said you are not behind, you are ahead. Because as outcast as you might have felt, you were doing something, and still are doing something, that the rest of the population is inevitably going to wake up into. Inevitably, the rest of the population will have to acknowledge that there's more to this reality than just this physical reality and just Earth. It is inevitable. So in this inevitable reality, think from a divine perspective. In this inevitable reality, where the world wakes up to something where there's very, very little guidance and understanding of what this is, what is best for the whole? What is best for all of Earth? What's best for Earth is to have a percentage of the population take on the incredibly difficult task of spending a decade on something that's incredibly confusing, so that the entire planet doesn't destabilize for a decade. If nobody knew anything about any of this, if nobody knew anything about intuition and soul, if nobody knew anything about being able to differentiate between bodily programming or false light teachings and truth as it ripples through your being and your connection to the ideal, if people didn't know about any of this, then the world would begin to go through the same thing that you did that feels like psychosis. It feels like everything's falling apart, and often everything does fall apart. For the entire world to go into a destabilization period is anything but ideal. So how does divinity bring ideal here? Through you. You are playing an incredibly important role, one that's been incredibly difficult and confusing, but will continue to make more and more sense as time goes on. So we've mentioned this before, that some individuals go to the etheric education, loop back into global education, and do this intuitively. But here's what we mean by that. We'll expand on it just a little bit. What we mean is that there are individuals like yourself who have taken on this decade-long challenge of exploring things that the large majority of the population thinks are crazy and don't exist. And you're exploring this because you were guided to it. And often there's very little rationalization outside of, I feel like I need to do this, which makes it seem even crazier. But because you continued to keep going, even though it didn't make sense, and didn't opt out when it got really hard, as you can watch certain people opt out along that journey, and you can watch they're still speaking about the same practices, the same things. They opted out where they were, and they're waiting for the world to catch up and push them forward. But because you didn't opt out and you kept going and kept trusting yourself, no matter how difficult emotionally it may have gotten, or as confusing as it may have been, you continue to trust your intuition. Now you are able to go through this global education intuitively while the rest of the world goes through it a little more haphazardly. So from the very beginning, right now, in this period of time, there are going to be some of you that feel the role coming on to be able to help synthesize and make sense of things for others. And the reason why you're feeling that is because you have a very unique tool set, your intuition, that the large majority of the world does not have to the degree that you have. Remember, you skipped ahead to chapter 7 and then looped back to chapter 5. What this means is you're able to help make sense of things intuitively, and you're able to intuitively not go down certain rabbit holes that either are completely false or are overly destabilizing for no reason, and you're able to learn at a phenomenal rate. When you go through something intuitively, your ability to learn is 10x'd, 100x'd. You can learn something significantly faster because you aren't going down rabbit holes that aren't useful. You aren't taking things past their point of relevance. So now you, on the cutting edge, having completed in some ways Chapter 7 of Etheric Education, are now coming back to Chapter 5 of Global Education, and you get to begin helping and engaging with the world even now. That process is only going to continue. And if you continue on that path of trusting yourself, where this goes is helping people really just simply through your being. Through your beingness, through exactly who you are, through your innate gifts, through your unique values, through your unique skill sets and gifts and aptitudes, you are able to help individuals to dial in through that etheric education with a deep level of precision without going off the rails into deep disassociation, without being overly infiltrated by all of the etheric pushback that's out there. You get to help people to remember who they are. You get to help people to remember that who they are is okay, and that they can trust their journey, trust their path. For the large majority of people exploring now in this global education, who are going to continue exploring, who are going to open up into this etheric education, what they really need to know is that they're not crazy, that they're not wrong, that as their intuition continues to guide them forward, that they're on the right track. And the reason why you know that is because they're doing it and they feel compelled to do it in the same way that you felt compelled to follow spirituality in the past decade. It's the same force. It is their soul pressing them into it relentlessly, and they can't help but learn. So this is why, even over the past 6 months, perhaps a little longer, we've been speaking to rising to the energy and building inner solidity, being able to be yourself in the world and begin radiating your essence out into the world. It's not just to face the scariness of doing something that the large majority of the planet thinks is crazy. It's not about building unnecessary inner solidity. It's about building enough inner solidity to radiate your essence out into the world to be helpful to those who are going through the exact same thing now. As you build inner solidity, as you speak your truth, no matter how taboo it may seem, no matter how out there it may seem, you will notice the messages that come in of people, often privately, who say, "Thank you so much for sharing that. It brought me to tears. I don't see many people talking about this. I've been trying to make sense of it. Thank you so much for just being you." This is the reason why you've been exploring spirituality in the first place. There are those who will have explored spirituality for the past decade who will opt out of this global education and who will just simply wait for the world to move into that etheric education, and they'll teach things that are still ungrounded and still lead to disassociation. But the voices that will rise to the top are the voices that are most deeply grounded in truth. When you speak the truth, when you embody the truth, when you radiate your truest soul essence out into the world, people can feel that, especially people who are genuinely opening up into the subtleties of existence. Life and business are changing drastically for the planet every single day. And the trends in the market are going to change very, very dramatically as individuals begin going through this global education, as individuals go through that impact-driven, what can I do? Well, I'll invest in GameStop. And as they transition into, wow, there is way more here than I could have ever realized. Life is so much bigger than just Earth. Life is so much bigger than just this little reality that I thought was everything. I thought it was just humanity, and oh boy, was I wrong. Now what? How do I deal with any of this? How do I talk about any of this? How do I even think about any of this without my friends realizing that I'm thinking it and thinking that I'm crazy? These are the individuals that you get to help simply by being you publicly. The more you are you out in the world, the more you speak the truth that is rippling through you, the more of service you are able to be. And the individuals that continue to go down this path, as confronting as it is, and as much inner solidity as it requires right now, because the large majority still think it's crazy, the more individuals that are able to speak their truth regardless of pushback, enough to solidify simply into being who they are for real out in the world, will certainly have a role to play as the larger global consciousness shifts. So we hope this makes sense. We know it was a lot. But we hope it makes sense why you've gone through this confusing journey seemingly alone. Because the teacher of this classroom, knowing that students would have a massive difficulty with Chapter 7, asked a small subset of people to study that before they even got to Chapter 5. Some were willing to do it, and they were deeply confused. But over time, over a lot of time, that confusion transitioned into a deeply grounded embodiment of soul and divinity that is unparalleled and unmatched in its precision and its helpfulness. These individuals gained access to the ideal, and we include you in this, you personally. So now, we hope it makes sense why we've only been encouraging of David and Miriam and of everyone that we come into contact with to continue down the rabbit holes that are most appealing to them or that call to them, and to continue to trust themselves no matter how crazy or out there it may seem. Because what you are doing in these periods of time is you are intuitively navigating a global education with pinpoint precision. And you are getting to the most important things about that global education much quicker than the rest of the population will. In that you were able to lead. In that you were able to be a voice of reason and a voice of peace and stability. And as people begin moving into what do we do, they will also have models of what can be done and what is ideal, which is simply radiating who you truly are as truthfully, as honestly, as openly as possible. Ultimately, that's where the world is headed. Deep soul embodiment and expression. And though that total process may take quite a long time, the movement right now around this global education and the uprisings around that will feel relatively quick and short. Because things are moving rather rapidly. Corruption is being uncovered every day as more and more people are piling into global education. Once you realize that money and emotions are essentially hollow, that they're not a worthwhile trajectory for life, you can no longer be manipulated in the same way. When enough people are no longer able to be manipulated in the same way, the manipulations at play no longer work. So things are certainly changing. And to be a voice of peace and a voice of reason throughout that, to be solid and stable and to know that everything's working out perfectly, that there's a larger plan of divinity that's playing out perfectly and that's delivering the ideal to every essentially open channel on the planet constantly. As you connect through your channel to your own intuition and to your own soul's essence, you help anchor in the light, you help bring in more and more light that is future pacing where this collective is going and that is helping accelerate this overall process. You're playing in a very, very important role. So again, you are not behind. You never have been behind. You've simply been taking a different path that is highly orchestrated by divinity, and you've said yes to that. And now you are beginning to see your role in how things play out. You're beginning to see your role in this planet, perhaps in a way that you never have before. So we want to celebrate some of those initial inklings that may have been coming online within you of, wow, I'm incredibly solid even in the face of atrocity and corruption. I'm incredibly solid, more so than the large majority of people I see out there who are also researching the exact same pockets I am. We'd love to celebrate and acknowledge that little inkling within you and to lay context around it to ensure you that you're not crazy, you're on the right track. Keep going and trust that as you continue to follow your own soul's truth, things will come together in miraculous ways. This is a level of ideal that none of you could have planned on your own. You could have never, a decade ago, said, you know what, I want to get into spirituality because I think about 10 years from now, that trend is really going to pop and it's going to be really good for me. There was no sense of self-service here. In fact, often there was a sense of deep hesitation and deep internal confrontation of, I don't know why I'm doing this. This seems crazy, and it feels like everything's going to fall apart and will never get better. We assure you, all of this was for a reason, and in your continuing to access your own deep truth and knowing, you are coming into alignment with the ideal, and the more you come into alignment with the ideal, the more miraculous you will realize your path is as you look back at everything that you did. So congratulations and thank you. It is a deep honor and pleasure to play even the small role that we do, to be able to lay some context as you do what you would have done anyway, as you explore what you would have explored anyway. We thank you for your continual yes to your own divine truth. We thank you for your essence and its impact on this planet. We thank you for your solidity and your deep dedication to peace. And we're excited for all of your journeys in the years to come. There's no requirements here. There's no manic action to take. It's just context. Just context so that you can know why you've been on this insane journey and where ultimately this is going.
If you enjoyed this channel night, there's more where that came from at thesecondparadigm.com. Join the club. We'd love to have you.